You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm so excited you're here. I'm so excited to share this conversation I had with Evelyn Tribole, the co-author of Intuitive Eating. We talk about some of the most common misconceptions about intuitive eating. We talk about her own personal and professional growth and evolution, and we talk about the nitty-gritty research and science behind a lot of the concepts of intuitive eating and even studies about intuitive eating itself. You're going to love this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. And just in case you don't already know who Evelyn Tribole is, I'm pretty sure you all do. She is a fantastic registered dietitian located in Southern California. She has a private practice. She's the author of many books, the co-author of Intuitive Eating and the Intuitive Eating Workbook, along with Elise Resch. So feel free to check out Evelyn Tribole's work and to keep in touch with her there. One thing I wanted to announce is if you happen to listen to this podcast episode right as it comes out on Monday, February 18th, I wanted to let you know that I am hosting a webinar, and I'm going to be doing this monthly now, at least for the next little while. I'm going to be hosting a webinar for anyone who wants to join me. This one's geared towards the lay public. So I'm going to be talking about intuitive eating, what it is and why it works. So if you kind of want a little bit of a primer, a little bit of an introduction, or even if you feel confused about the topic of intuitive eating, you want a little bit more details, join me there. You can find the registration page on the website, positive-nutrition.com/webinar. And that's $15. If you can't make it live, I will be doing it live on February 19th at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. If you can't make it live, but you'd still like to join, you can actually still receive access after the fact. So I'll be recording it live, and those who join me live can ask questions, and then anybody who registers is also able to access the webinar there. Now, if you happen to be listening to this after February 19th, you can also access the webinar on the Academy part of the website. So positive-nutrition.com/academy, and it will be there for purchase anytime after the fact. So this is my new idea of putting out content that I have to kind of make little chunks of the work that I do and the presentations that I give a little bit more accessible. So my idea is to do one every other month for the lay public and one every other month for registered dietitians, and I will hopefully be able to offer continuing education credit. So next month in March, keep your eye out for a training for registered dietitians that will also be available either through the Academy website, positive-nutrition.com/academy, or available at that webinar/webinar page as well. So if you're a registered dietitian and you're listening, hang tight for next month. You might be interested. All right, so with that, let's get into talking with Evelyn Tribole. Hi, Evelyn. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I am so happy to be here. You have no idea. I love spreading the word.
You have no idea. Let's fight about it. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Um, well, thank you for joining me, and let's dive in to talking about you and kind of setting the stage. I think it would be silly if anyone didn't know your name already, but just in case they don't, talk about who you are and what you do, and a little bit about what brought you to the field of nutrition.
Oh my God, those are several different stories. Well, first of all, I'm Evelyn Tribbley, and I'm co-author of Intuitive Eating. And Intuitive Eating is something that I wrote with Elise Rush back in 1995, was our first edition. And here we are, almost 25 years later, and our work has taken off both in the research world, and it's also being embraced in the social media world, which is just so exciting. And then relatedly to the question, how did I get into this? It's really weird. People haven't asked me this, but okay. I I ran on the boys track team when I was in high school because there was no girls team, and I was determined to beat the boys, and I'm happy to say I often did. And I was looking at what I can eat to run faster and be better. That's what got me into nutrition. And it wasn't until I was a dietitian that I really got into the psychology of eating. But I love this work. I have a passion for what I do. That's the short version.
Okay, I love that. You know what, Evelyn? We are soul sisters because I used to whoop the boys too.
Oh,
And that was highly motivating for me too, especially with nutrition. That was actually one of the things that interested me as well. Like how do I run faster, shoot the ball better, hit the ball harder? Like that was highly motivating for me.
well, and I'll tell you, back in the day, because this was much longer from when I was doing it than when you were, is they didn't even make girls' clothing or girls' shoes back then. So I had to run in boys' clothing and boys' shoes. And I will never forget the first time running in a pair of shoes made for women. It felt like I was running on marshmallows. I thought I was going to die of happiness. So
Because women obviously need softer shoes, right?
well, we need running shoes, and I don't remember what I was running in, but whatever it was, it didn't fit very well. And anyway,
You're
I'm
like, okay,
appreciative of good equipment.
yes. And my, how things have changed.
Yeah, they really have. Thank
Are you
God.
still a runner?
That's a really interesting question. I still identify as a runner, and it sounds weird to say that. I actually had a knee surgery 2 years ago, and I haven't been able to run ever since. And so I'm
Oh.
at this place of working on acceptance that maybe I won't be able to run again, but I'm still incredibly active. I hike, I kayak, I play competitive ping pong, and all kinds of stuff. So in my mind, I'm still a runner, though.
Please tell me more about your ping pong. I just need to hear more about it.
Well, I will tell you, I grew up playing ping pong. I even had a ping pong table because I love it. And long story short, or short story long, this is so funny. I was at a retreat last year, an 8-day retreat, and I found a ping pong table. And I recruited some fellow meditators on break to come play ping pong. I said, we can unleash the power of our mind on a ping pong ball. And that unleashed something in me. And I've been getting these emails about joining this ping pong group in my area. So I finally decided to check it out. And what ended up happening is uh, it's a tournament of men. I'm the only woman that plays, and I get my ass kicked very routinely. And so much so, this is part that cracks me up. I actually have a coach who used to play professional ping pong. I kid you not. And his daughter is ranked 12th in the world for her age group. So I'm a wicked ping pong player.
That is amazing. And
Oh my God.
you're
Yeah,
back
it's
to your
fun.
roots of playing with a bunch of dudes.
Well, I was telling my coach that my background. He goes, "Oh, this makes so much sense." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Usually when women come, they play once and they're gone." He goes, "But you're very comfortable in your element." And I said, "Yeah, you know what? I have body privilege in that way that because I have an athletic background, I truly know that with time and practice, I'll get better. So I'm not threatened by my inabilities currently."
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, that I know. I love your bio on Instagram says something like a bunch of really cool, amazing accolades, and then you're like, and wicked ping pong player. I just love
Yeah.
that.
I feel kind of proud about that for some
You
reason. I
should
don't
be
know why,
proud.
but I do.
It's awesome. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so this book, Intuitive Eating, if anyone has not heard of it, if this is your first time coming to the podcast, we do talk about this a ton on here, but your book, a lot of people don't realize you wrote this book in 1995.
Yeah, it was before it was cool, you know. We
Yeah.
weren't one of the. In fact, I'll never forget. And by the way, I have no problem with standing in controversy as long as we have some good research behind it. But I remember being a little bit afraid about what are my colleagues going to be thinking about this? Are they going to want to throw French fries at us, you know?
Right.
And we were actually pretty much embraced because it's a very freeing model. And it's interesting because there was a study done a couple of years ago on dietitians and their knowledge and use of intuitive eating. And what they found made a lot of sense to me. And it was basically for dietitians who've been in private practice or who've been who've been a dietitian for a longer period of time, they're the ones who use and embrace the model. I thought, yep, makes sense because when your brand's squeaky new, you think you can put anyone on a diet and they lose weight, but you do this long enough and you see the horrors over and over again that it doesn't work and it doesn't feel good in your soul to be working that way, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I just spoke over the weekend at a conference about intuitive eating and some evidence-based models for body image work, and it was fascinating. A lot of the feedback I got, the audience was dietitians, a lot of new, younger dietitians and or students even. The feedback I got was, wow, I really had the wrong idea about what intuitive eating is. This
Uh,
really helped me understand it. I thought it was, and we can actually maybe talk about this quite a bit, what those misconceptions are. But you're right. I think when we're new, we think, oh, that's weird. That's out there. What is that? I'm gonna save the world one meal plan at a time, right?
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that misconception. I think it's real important to really be on the same page as to what intuitive eating is, because what I find is there's this street sense of what intuitive eating is, and then there's the actual real definition of what it is. So it's like the blessing and the curse of becoming popularized. You know, there's over, I think, 800,000 hashtags on Instagram alone on intuitive eating. And I tell you, I've seen some stuff on there that's not intuitive eating under that hashtag. So here's what intuitive eating is on a research evidence-based level. So intuitive eating is a self-care eating framework with 10 principles and its own assessment tool, and it's evidence-based, and there's over 90 studies to date showing benefit. So that in a nutshell is what intuitive eating is. It's a mind-body thing where you're in charge of listening to your body and deciding how you're going to treat it. The street level, what I often hear from folks is, oh, you can either eat whatever you want, however you want, who cares? And it's like, no, it's not the whatever diet, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what scares people. And I had an interesting thing happen many years ago. God, I think it was in 2006. And the only reason I remember that year is a lot of stuff happened. Some research came out. A scientist actually came out in Utah who said, hey, I used to have a really big issue with weight until I did intuitive eating. And he published a small study on intuitive eating. And long story short, the next thing you know, Associated Press picked up his story. It went international. And he was asked to be on the Today Show, as was I. And so we went on, and I thought we did a pretty awesome interview. And as a side note, I've had a lot of television experience. I used to be a regular on Good Morning America. So you really get a feel if you're connecting, if you did a good job. And so my feel was pretty good until I got home and I got all this voicemail, and it's like, what the hell are you doing, Evelyn? This, you're promoting a junk food diet. And actually I got some good mail too, but I thought, what, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't resonate with how I felt we did. So I had this habit, I still do when I do interviews, is I go back and listen and see what was well, what I did well, what can I improve on. And so I'm looking at the video and I go, oh, and I turned off the volume. I go, oh, this is what happened. And all the camera was doing all these close-ups on pastries and donuts and candies and whatever. And I can see how if someone's watching this while they're getting ready for work, they got the impression that it's like, who cares, And so they didn't actually hear the words and the messages. And so one of the core components of intuitive eating is making peace with food. You have permission to eat what you want, with attunement. And so some people think that that becomes a free for all. And I don't realize what we're really talking about here is psychological health, that there's a very powerful thing that happens. I call it the paradox of permission, that when you're allowed to eat what you want, it removes the phenomenon of Last Supper eating. And that is when you think you're never, ever going to have fill in the blank, whatever food it is. When you have an opportunity to eat it, oh my gosh, you're going to get it now. You're going to have it in big quantities because you're never, ever, ever going to have it again. And I can't tell you how often I see that pattern. So it gets rid of that phenomenon. And instead, what you're left with is, well, I can eat this food. Do I want it? Do I want it now? If I eat it now, am I going to enjoy it? And then when you finally have it, do I like it? And do I like how it feels in my body? So it's really profound what happens with this kind of body autonomy. And the paradox is some people end up discovering they don't like the very foods that they've been lusting over because they've been so stuck in the excitement cycle of I get to have it, I get to have it, I'm going to eat it so fast before I change my mind, that they've never really tasted the food. So what happens in time is they end up getting balanced, and it's a very important part of intuitive eating.
Yeah. So one of the big misconceptions is eat whatever you want whenever you want it, and just oversimplifying the entire model to those, two phrases. It's tough to even talk about that, because on one level it is kind of saying you really can eat whatever
Yeah,
you want, right?
yeah,
So
you
how do
can.
let's dive into that and let's really hit on that, because I think that might still be confusing for some people.
Yeah, and actually, I'll tell you, who's really confusing for is the dietitians I train. We train health professionals in this work so the integrity is aligned with what intuitive eating is supposed to be. And I've had a lot of dietitians struggle with this, and I actually encourage them to verbalize the struggle so they can do an awesome job with their own patients and clients. And I hear things like, Evelyn, the idea that it's okay to eat French fries goes against all my training. And so then I'll say something like, well, what if it turns out that by someone having permission to eat French fries, they really enjoy them and they're satisfied and they're done, and they don't overeat them, versus someone who can't have French fries, they really want the French fries, so they eat a bunch of other kinds of things to fill that desire. They eat air popped popcorn, they eat baked potato chips, and they eat all these foods. It still hasn't hit the spot, and they still go have the French fries. Which do you think is a healthier outcome? So sometimes it's stepping back from the lens of what's happening here and now and looking at what the big picture is. And when we look at the big picture in terms of a pattern of eating, it's the pattern of eating that matters with time. One food, one meal is not going to make or break your health. And so sometimes it reflects a rigidity of thinking. It's an oversimplification of research. Sometimes studies get published that are interesting, but they get misrepresented in headlines in the media, and the nuances aren't figured out. Like there was no control group, or OPS, this was a rat study,
Yeah.
So it's part of what the issue is, and in making peace with food, is this idea that we have to step out and not have any morality in our eating. And I often joke that, unless you killed the chef, or unless you killed that Girl Scout for the Girl Scout cookies, that sounds awful, just me saying that as an example. Those are reasons to have guilt, but other than something like that, you're not breaking a moral code. And we need to remove the morality from eating and the judgment of eating. You're not good or bad based on what you eat. The food is not good or bad. It's just food. And let's connect. And one of the things I like to do when there's questions or controversies, I like to take a look at, well, let's look at patterns of eating from other cultures. And when you look at, for example, the country France, we know that they love their butter and their white flour and sugar and so on. And I will use those as examples compared to the United States. And in France, they have one of the lowest rates of heart disease in the world. I think the last I looked, they're ranked third. The United States is ranked 17th. So go figure. And then when you start putting morality on eating, and you start putting stress on eating, what does that do to health? And there was a really profound study published many years ago by a food psychologist looking at patterns of eating and thinking with health and eating in 4 different countries, including France, United States, Belgium, and Japan. And what they found is that Americans worried the most about what they eat, and they enjoyed it the least. And the French, on the other hand, is like, oh, they love their food. And so when we updated intuitive eating on the 3rd edition, I thought, it'd be interesting to see the health indicators. And it's sure enough, France looked a lot healthier than the United States did. But one of the points the researcher made, Paul Rozin, he was so ahead of his time, because this study, I think, was done in the early
He's
90s.
amazing, by the way. He's such an amazing researcher.
Yeah, I love his stuff. And
I
he
know.
asked the question, what about the impact of stress on our health? How about the impact of worrying? Because now, he didn't say this, but we're at a point now where we have worries that this bite of food you're going to eat is going to either kill you or make you fat. And I'm talking about the average American in this case. What about that worry? That cannot be good for your health. And this is before we knew all the impact on stress and health. And we know that stress amplifies the weakest link. In fact, today I just posted a study looking at a very small study looking at inflammatory markers, and people who had body dissatisfaction actually had higher levels of these stress compounds running around in their body. So it's not good for our health. So this is why we step back and look at the overall impact of health. And then health is more than what we eat. It's our relationships with ourselves, with other people, and so on. It's complex, and sometimes it gets very binary and reductionist in some folks' language in terms of what healthy eating is and so on.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this about me, Evelyn, but that's one of my big missions with this field is, and with the work that I do, with my clients, of course, but also the stuff I do more publicly, is to really encourage people to explore the nuance
Oh,
because
thank God.
we are so, I mean, even intuitive eating spaces can be, can fall victim to binary thinking and reductionism. And so I am so interested in the nuance because I really think that that's where the magic happens.
It does. And that's why, it's funny. I don't remember which Fiona it was. They're both from Australia, either Fiona Willer or Fiona Sutherland. They've been very vocal about intuitive eating and non-diet practices are actually specialties. And I thought, yeah, because I don't want to be blasting on my colleagues, but I've seen dietitians get it wrong, where they misrepresent the work, and there are nuances. And also the good news is that we can use our training in medical nutrition therapy and intuitive eating, and it works really, really beautifully. I've had some good conversations with Kate Scarlato, who you probably know who she is. She's like an expert in FODMAPs, and that's one of the biggest things that she sees is that people get too reductionist about that
Yeah.
you can integrate medical nutrition therapy with intuitive eating, and it's really quite beautiful, and more importantly, it's empowering for the patient. And it's actually very gratifying then for the health practitioner to work in this way because you're working in an
Yes.
empowerment model.
Yes. Yes. So I'm so grateful for your voice. I feel like we've
Well,
needed
thanks.
someone to come in and just with authority say, hey, this model can work with medical nutrition therapy and with allergies and with X, Y, or Z nutrition need. I'm so grateful for that. I've been advocating for that and I've been trying to build this bridge, but I do feel like there's a lot of fighting in the dietitian community, and I'm just grateful that you're here to kind of help everybody find their way. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. I really believe intuitive eating can be a bridge in our own community because there seems to be this very the split that's going on. And in fact, just applied to speak at Fancy next year for Elise and I to speak on intuitive eating because I think it could be a
Great.
tremendous source of
Yes.
healing. I don't think we don't find out till the end of February if we get it or not. I hope that we do. Fingers crossed. But what I see is, and this is something that just, it tickles me actually, because I train health professionals, including dietitians, in how to cultivate intuitive eating. It's not enough just to read the book. It's not enough to read the research. You have to know how to help cultivate it with somebody that you're working with. And so I often get these comments in our discussion groups or in the supervision groups I lead where they'll say things, my mind's being blown because what they're learning is so different than what they've been taught at school. And one of the things I think is so critical is to have critical thinking, including critical thinking along the lines of intuitive eating. Because when you start looking at the so-called obesity research, there are so many flaws and limitations. And apparently when it's being taught as if it's the solution when the data do not support it. And further, the data show it causes harm, that when you're putting someone on the path of weight loss, not only is it not sustainable, it causes rebound weight gain in most folks, but it hurts their mind and their body, and it proliferates weight stigma. And weight stigma is a very significant health risk factor in of its own right. In fact, there was a study published not too long ago showing that someone exposed just to one incidence of weight stigma, it raised their A1C, and that's an indicator of how our blood sugar has been doing for the last 3 months, which I know that but it raises that. So these things have consequences. They have impact. So I see intuitive eating as this bridge for our profession. I'm thinking like, guys, well, actually, girl, what do you want to say? I don't know what the proper word is, but it's like this is a universal model created by two dietitians. I don't know. Actually, there's another eating model by Ellen Satter for kids, but to have a model that's created by dietitians, this is something we should be lifting each other up with. It's a way to work in a field in which not only are you helping somebody and empowering them, but it's a gratifying way to work in this process. This process is very humanistic, you know?
Yes. And it's so consistent with so many other modalities and theoretical frameworks that just feel ethical and that feel empowering. So it's amazing. I also want to mention, so a big misconception is eat anything, whenever, no rules, who cares, no structure, blah, blah, blah. And I want to add one more point to that before we move on to another misconception.
Yeah.
Another point I wanted to make is when someone gets all of their education, quote unquote, about intuitive eating via social media, I feel like that can be incredibly confusing, and it can actually create some opposite reaction than even what we're trying to do. For instance, I've had clients come to me and say, I don't know, is it okay that I ate a vegetable? Like, am I in trouble that I chose a salad for dinner last night? You know, and not like a wimpy salad, like a meal salad, you know? And so I think when you say make peace with food, as, you know, we often talk about, you know, make peace with brownies and ice cream and stuff like that, but we also want to be making peace ultimately with vegetables and with things that maybe we typically have thought of as diety type foods.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I've had many patients ask me about that too. And it's kind of it's humorous on some level because they'll say, is it okay if I start eating healthy? And usually I like to unpack things when someone asks me a question, because of course you can, but what's your fear behind that question? And often the fear is, I'm afraid I'm going to go down the rabbit hole of dieting behavior and diet culture. I
Yeah.
go, oh, that's really understandable. So you're coming at a place from self-care. That's awesome. And that's why one of the important things to look at is what is the intention behind your behavior that can help you get clarity on that. And one of my surprises when I got onto Instagram, like I said, I'm just a newbie on it. It appears that donuts are the poster child that represents intuitive eating, you
Right?
know?
Yep.
Yeah. And so I don't want anyone to have to apologize because they ate a donut, or they have to apologize or explain because they're eating a salad.
Right.
It's food, you know? And
Right.
so I think when we get into it more binary, here's what I see happening. When folks are coming from diet culture, which tends to be very binary, all or none, black or white, sometimes they take that perspective unknowingly into intuitive eating. Sometimes they'll
Ding,
say, oh
ding,
no,
ding.
yeah, I blew
Yes.
it because I ate when I wasn't hungry, or oh, I blew it because I didn't stop when I was full. And it's like, no, 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 no. There is no failing on intuitive eating. It's all learning. It's all discovery. What did you discover by doing this? What did you discover eating past fullness? Did you notice you stayed, you didn't get hungry for a longer period of time? Did you end up eating a lighter dinner afterwards? Not because you're trying to compensate, but you just generally wanted less food. And what happens with a lot of the people I work with is they panic and they have no idea because they micromanaged it. They decided, well, I have to eat less food at dinner, and they didn't get to see what their body naturally did. And so one of the things I like to say is you're really in charge of this. You're the expert of your body. I don't know your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and what satisfies. I can help cultivate this process, but we need to be equal partners in this process. And that's what's so important, that they have a voice, including asking these kinds of questions, like, is it okay if I do X, Y, or Z? And then let's look at why or why not it may help you, or maybe it might create more challenges than what you need to be experiencing right now. So yeah, it's good.
Great points. I love that. So another misconception, we've kind of alluded to this so far, but let's speak to it directly.
Mhm.
Another misconception, or maybe part of the sort of battle we've also talked about that's kind of happening in the dietitian community, is this idea of weight loss. So
Uh,
let's just kind of hit the nail on the head there a little bit and talk about that concept. What does intuitive eating say about weight loss?
you know what it says. And Oh, this drives me nuts when it's from health professionals, not from consumers. It's understandable in diet culture that folks would want to be pursuing weight loss. That basically the way that we describe it in the book is that you need to put weight loss on the back burner, and that no health professional, including me, can tell you what your body's going to do with intuitive eating. So, for example, some folks might lose weight as a side effect. Some folks might stay the same. Some folks might gain the weight. It depends on what your body needs. And so if anyone is telling you you can lose weight and be an intuitive, that intuitive eating will help you lose weight, they don't understand intuitive eating, and it's a big misrepresentation. And I would say run away as fast as you can. They don't know what they're talking about, because intuitive eating is about connection. And I just had someone DM me saying, "Oh my gosh, this person is saying you have to count macros to be an intuitive eater," which is so preposterous. And that's not what intuitive eating says either. And so let me just stop for a moment and explain what one of the big underlying points of intuitive eating is. I'm going to get deep here with your permission.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
on the surface level, it's about connecting with your body. That sounds really obvious. Yeah, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full for the most part. But it's deeper than that. It has to do with interoceptive awareness. Interoceptive awareness is our spidey sense as a human being. It's one of the most exciting things, I think, about intuitive eating and the research around interoceptive awareness. And what this is our ability to perceive physical sensations that arise from within the body. And some of these things are obvious, like states, like having a full bladder. Oh, you got a full bladder. You know what you got to do about that. Have a racing heart. You feel physically sleepy. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're full. Those are physical sensations. But, and this is the one that just gets me, every emotional feeling has a physical sensation. So when you're connecting to your body, you're connecting to the needs on a biological, on a psychological. It's so profound. And nowhere do you count things to figure that out. This is not counting macros.
You
It's
don't
not.
you don't measure how many cups of pee you pee every day? Come on.
It's funny. I've had conversations with my patients, and as I'll say, if you've got to pee, it might be annoying, it might be inconvenient. You might have just gone a half an hour ago, but no one ever questions the need to pee. And I
Absolutely.
say
Yep.
it's okay to feel annoyed that you're hungry, you just ate. But yeah, you can have days that you're hungrier, and just like you would never have anyone tell you how much to pee, let alone to measure. That's what they're trying to do with all these food plans and so on. It's absolutely preposterous.
So weight loss with intuitive eating, it's not anti weight loss. It's not saying you're a bad
Correct.
person if your body happens to decrease weight when you tune in and connect and take care of yourself. But the point of intuitive eating is not weight loss, because that's not, like, let's just face it, that's not right for every person. That's not going to be healthy for every person. Some people need to gain weight. Some people need to will stay the same. Like, we can't predict that reliably and or ethically and or scientifically for any person. That is
No,
just what happens as a result, right?
yeah, and what's so interesting? We talk about how diet culture is everywhere. Diet culture's also hijacked research, and I'll give you some examples. So this is an understanding as to why some health professionals might associate intuitive eating with weight loss. There have been a number of studies who've looked at the body mass index, and as you know, that is fraught with problems. It's not a reliable tool or an indicator of your health, but it's used in research a lot. And there was especially a big study out of France looking at 50,000 people. That's a big number. And they found that people who were identified as intuitive eaters through an intuitive eating assessment scale had a lower body mass index. And it made big headline news. France got all excited. It's like, oh my gosh, this has got to be public health policy. And so, but nowhere did it say this was not an intervention study. This is just an association study. And the one thing I can say that this did for some people, for the people that were afraid that, oh my gosh, if you let people eat whatever they want, they're going to be out of control and it's going to affect their bodies, this kind of says, no, it doesn't. But I really hate even just focusing on BMI, because it's such a poor metric to begin with. So on the one hand, it's understandable, but on the other hand, I want to be really, really well, actually, you know what? Let me say another one to get people off the hooks too. The first two editions of Intuitive Eating, on the cover, it used to say, get to the natural weight your body is meant to be. And so Elise and I got a lot of feedback on that, especially after the second edition. And some health professionals say, that is promoting a weight-focused agenda. And the other thing that Elise and I started seeing is that people were judging their intuitive eating based on what was going on with their weight. And we thought this is
Mm.
problematic. So we decided, man, we're gonna fight our publisher for the third edition, and we got to get this taken off the cover. And we thought it'd be a big fight. Most people don't know this, but authors don't have much say or control in the covers of their books, even in the titles. And to our pleasant surprise, our publisher, St. Martin, said, "Sure, go for it. That's fine."
Oh, great.
Yay! So we took out all numbers, except for carbs. I think we mentioned something on carbs, but took all references to weights and so on because it wasn't helping the process. So maybe that's why some people are confused. But I just want to be really, really clear. This is not about weight loss. It's about connecting with the body. And I've had conversations with Tracy Tilka, who's done some seminal research on intuitive eating. She's the one that created the assessment scales.
Yeah.
And she goes, it's just amazing how study after study keeps showing the validity of this work. It's like the unifying theory of eating, like that comes from happiness psychology being positive psychology,
Right.
as opposed to pathology like eating disorders and so on. So I have just seen so many people's lives change. I think that's part of the reason why I have such passion, for this work.
Me too. Absolutely. And I just respect you and Elise so much because it's so tricky to talk about eating and nutrition and to meet people where they are and to connect with what they're going through and what they're thinking and the way that our culture talks about food, but also to nudge people along and to encourage people to open their mind and shift their paradigm. That is tough, tough work. Meanwhile, you have all these health professionals with really strong opinions and really strong convictions in this arena too, reading your work. And I admire you so much. It's not easy to navigate all of those different kind of things pulling at you.
No, but there's a couple of things that always keep me going. First of all, I'm just kind of I actually track it back to my high school days when I was running on the boys team. I didn't tell you this part, but the coach didn't want me to letter because I was a girl, even though I met all the requirements. And so I fought him, and I went to the principal, and I won. So I think I've always had this
Love it.
on the one hand, I was always like a rule follower, like the goody two shoes kind of girl, except when something was wrong, I would step up and get out of my comfort zone. And this is one of those areas as well. And so one of the things, and what I think what helps me personally is seeing the lives of patients change. But I also, as a side note, I'm a geek. I have an inner nerd part of me. I just love research. So last year I had this really big conversation with this obesity researcher. He had emailed me and said, I want to use intuitive eating in my studies, but some of the dietitians you've trained have said, absolutely not. I'd like to can we talk about this? Actually, he wanted to do it over email. I said, this is such an important conversation. I'd rather have it over Skype. So we had it over Skype. And it was actually a very civil and dignified conversation with this idea of wanting to have the understanding of what's going on. And so I was telling him about intercept awareness and all these kinds of things. And I said, this is why you can't use both models. If you have someone counting calories, counting macros, you're putting them focused on an external basis. And in the end, I said, I've got some research I'd love to share with you if you'd like to read it. He said, yeah, of course. I said, why don't you give me your stuff? Give me your best, So he did. And when I read it, I have to tell you, I was so disappointed because I was reading the data, and a lot of it was association data. It was not intervention studies. So one of the things in terms of navigating this minefield with your own health professionals or other colleagues, or it's like, show me the data. Show me the data where a long-term study in humans, an intervention study that actually worked and was sustainable. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And we've now have over 40 years, actually more than that. If you count back since World War II on the Minnesota starvation study, we have over 60 years of data showing that this doesn't work. And if this was a medication, if dieting was a medication, it would never be approved ever for any kind of health policy. And yet so many health policies are so weight focused, it's very confusing and difficult, especially on consumers.
Do you feel like you were able to kind of uh, speak to the researcher and that he or she heard you?
Well, I think he heard me, but the problem that I see that we have right now, in fact, it's funny, I'm on a special project right now with a physician and a psychologist to address this, is that right now in the obesity research field, this is my opinion, is such a dominant paradigm based on belief is that the folks can't see beyond it. Do you know what I mean? They're not seeing
Yeah.
the harm. They're not reading the research in the eating disorder worlds and
Or
other
the weight
worlds of
stigma
research.
research.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so what it's funny, I was really lucky to have a scientist mentor on another book project many years ago, and he taught me this. I think he made up the phrase himself. I don't know that for a fact, but he taught me the term science silo mentality. And that's where there's scientists that have an area of expertise, but they don't talk amongst each other. And as a result, you're missing the big picture. And so that's what I'm seeing is happening. It's a dominant paradigm. And now what's happening with healthcare is now it's a big money making business to be selling surgeries and weight loss. And now you add an economic incentive, it's really an issue. So
Plus, there's
it's,
egos, right? There's egos.
yeah, there's
This
all
is what
kinds
I've
of
been
stuff
studying my whole
involved.
life, and this is my livelihood, and this is what I'm known for, and this is my reputation.
Right, it's a sunk cost thing, and there's
Yeah.
confirmation bias and all of this. But to the researchers, like, hey, guess what? This is the nature of research. It's an evolution. And actually, there's something I love talking about. I'm going to do a post on it, and it's something called the Semmelweis reflex. Have you heard of that?
No.
Okay. Oh my God, I have to tell you about this. So, Semmelweis reflex is named after a famous doctor who discovered that if you don't wash your hands, you're going to kill mamas giving birth. And so, what happened is all these women were dying giving childbirth, and this doctor, Dr. Semmelweis, figured it out. If the doctors weren't washing their hands, those were the women that were dying. And I forget how he did a study, but he did a study to prove his point. And guess what? He was laughed and scoffed at by his medical colleagues. He said, oh, we're gentlemen. We don't kill people.
Yeah.
And he actually, unfortunately, it had effect on his mental health, and he ended up committing suicide over this. And it was some years later that Louis Pasteur came out and proved, oh yeah, bacteria, these invisible things cause disease. So he was exonerated, but dead. And so Semmelweis reflex is a phenomenon in which there's a bunch of research coming out that disproves the common popular paradigm. But because these folks are so entrenched on their view, they don't see it. So it's called the Semmelweis reflex. So I think one day we're going to look back at all of this weight loss policy and realize we've been Semmelweis folks.
Ooh, yeah.
See, so the point is, we have a precedent of this in medical research. This is not the first time. It's a problem. There was a guy, I forget all the names now, but I'll just tell you the story, who discovered inflammation was the cause of heart disease and clogging of the arteries and so on. But he wasn't really popular. There was another guy who was really popular. So they discounted the inflammation theory, and it was 100 years later that it was proven right. So it's just problematic. But I think what's different now with social media, and I'm happy to see these young physicians coming aboard who are really, health at every size, that they're research based, and they see the futility and the harm that's happening with weight stigma, that, I think it's possible we can change this world, one conversation at a time in the areas that we have a voice. It's easy when you have a platform to get on your soapbox, which I do.
I love your
But
soapboxes.
thank you. But you know what? In my personal life, I've been doing it. Every doctor's appointment now that I've had, I refuse to be weighed, and then I tell them why. And I will tell you, I've been shocked at the responses I've been having. They've been incredibly positive. I had a doctor say to me, well, what do I do then? And it was so sincere. I thought, oh my God, now I know why. I've always loved you. But,
Yeah.
so that kind of stuff gives me hope that what if the relationships that you currently have, you have an honest dialogue and start questioning this? It's like, geez, doc, where's the research on that this is even sustainable? I've been on 10 million diets since I was 10 years old, and the weight always comes back on. Can you show me something that really works based on intervention studies? And no, they can't, but it gets them thinking.
Absolutely. So tell me about you and your growth, kind of personally and professionally, through all of this learning and all of these amazing studies that are coming out about intuitive eating, your own process through it all, and also like any sort of backlash you might be getting from even, I mean, we talked about some of the misconceptions from one side of the coin, kind of maybe the more weight focused side of the coin, but what about folks who are advocating for body liberation and, um, fat activists, like what do they think of intuitive eating, and what's your response to that?
Oh, this is such a great conversation, and we need to have more of these conversations. So let me just start with my own story. And by the way, body autonomy and body liberation is so important for all bodies, weight inclusivity. But we all have a learning curve. I look back in the early parts of my career, especially writing. I wrote diets, thinking, I mean, for national magazines, I'd be on the cover, and it'd be like, "Oh, this is how you can eat sugar." I'm thinking I'm doing a greater good. And looking back, I wince now because that's part of diet culture, even though my intentions were quite good. And in fact, I will never forget, there was a very, very big magazine. The name escapes me, it really does, but I was having a conversation with the editor, and she wanted me to write a story, a diet story, on how you can lose 10 pounds and get into your black dress for New Year's after Christmas. And that was so preposterous. That was egregious. I said, no, that's not ethical. I explained all this stuff. And she still wanted to do it because she said, what 10 days is not going to hurt? And that was the day I realized there's a whole problem, and I'm part of the problem if I continue to write these kinds of stories. And I tell you, they wanted to pay me a lot of money, and I turned it down. So my point in sharing this with you is, as I have grown as an individual and as the research has grown as well, I have changed and I have evolved. Some of the stuff I wrote in my early days, I wouldn't be recommending to patients right now. Like, for example, I did the recipe makeover column for Shape magazine. It was actually something I was very proud of. And basically, readers would send in their favorite recipes, and I would make them over so they're healthier. And the moment anything was compromised, taste, texture, quality, I wouldn't change anything more. And so what I'd be doing is I would be increasing fiber, increasing whole grains, but I was also cutting calories. And so that's not something I'd be doing today. So my point is, we all evolve. And so right now, as we're going into, I haven't told very many people this yet, but we are going to be working on our 25th edition for intuitive eating. It's the 4th edition, but it's the 25th anniversary. It'll be out next year. Elise and I are going through this with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's any weight stigmatizing comments in there, any fat phobic comments. And to my chagrin and wincing, there's a couple in there that we've already found. And so it's just an acknowledgement of our own growth, and that we have to listen. And I've been very lucky in my career. I've had amazing mentors like Deb Regard and Linda Bacon. When I've spoken at conferences, they've taken me aside privately and said, you really can't say this because the research doesn't show it. And they would say it in such a kind way. I could hear them, and I changed. That's part of the reason why the cover on intuitive eating changed, was from our discussions with them. And what I see sometimes happening in the activist arena, there's this calling out, and I understand it, but I think what ends up happening, especially with health professionals, is they end up feeling shame. And when you're feeling shame, it's hard to hear the message. And so I'm a huge advocate of the Reverend Angel Kyoto. She is someone who has a lot of intersectionality. She is a Buddhist priest. She's Black, and she identifies, I believe, as queer. I might have that part wrong, and I apologize. But my point is, she has a lot of intersectionality. And what she advocates is for something called calling in. And that is where you do recognize someone's intention, but you educate them on what they're doing is wrong and that it's harmful. And I think that's what Deborah Gard and Linda Bacon did for me. So I'm a big advocate of that. And yet I also understand the fat activist, any kind of advocates for social justice, that they've got to get the intention, and you got to call it out where you see it. And I think there's a middle ground. And I think for our profession, for dietitians, the healing comes in that middle ground, the calling in. And so the calling in is like, hey, dudes, dietitians, dudettes. The data don't exist. The data don't exist that it works. There's a ton of data now showing that weight stigma in of itself independently causes a lot of the harms that are so-called purportedly that take place in higher bodies. This is not ethical. We have to be better and do better. If we're all for evidence-based practice, then why aren't you practicing evidence-based? And it's something that really gets me, because I'll get people calling and saying, what's the evidence for intuitive eating? I want to use it in my worksite wellness program. And I'm thrilled that they're asking those questions, but I'm asking, why aren't they asking this in terms of these
Right.
so-called weight loss programs? So my point is that we all evolve and we grow, and I think it's important that we own these things. And I recently, this is actually, I think it's a cool story. I was at last fall. I do supervision, and I had a nurse practitioner in my a group, and she called me out actually in an email and mentioned, I forget what phrase I used. And this has to do with drug addiction. I think I might have used the term addicts as opposed to people with addiction or people with substance abuse. And she went on in this long email describing how that's hurtful, and then went on to share her own addiction story. And I said, what you just shared with me in this email is really a great example of calling in. And with your permission, I'd like to use this email in our supervision group as a great example of how you call in health practitioners. And I said, I can't help but wonder if you were nervous in doing this, because in theory, I'm the teacher. And she said, hell yeah, I was so nervous, but I'm also wanted to stand in my conviction, because she's had a lot of experience in this. And it was a beautiful conversation. So leaders in the field need to also be the leaders in showing that we still are learning. We're not perfect, you know?
Yeah, and that there's no shame in that. And we can own our process, but we can also, expect to change our mind and expect to learn and grow and expect to maybe think and talk and say things a little bit differently 5 years from now than we even are right now because we're going to
Yeah.
learn, right?
Exactly. We do better, we grow better, and the way we do this is through compassionate learning and compassionate listening.
Yeah, it's so true. I struggle sometimes when people want me as a podcaster to have every single conversation that I've put out there be exactly the way I would talk right now in 2019. And
Mm,
I've struggled. Do I keep those up? Do I put them down? And they're not egregious or anything, but at the same time, sometimes some of what I say is a little cringy, or like you were saying. Um, but I think that there's a balance to be struck where we don't want to cause harm and we don't want to have things out there that are just blatantly wrong. But at the same time, we also want to model and show, hey, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm imperfect. This is messy, and that's all okay. Because in the end, that's what we're asking our clients and patients to do too.
right. Yes. It's called evolve, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you've learned and grown and changed and evolved, and so are the rest of us, and all of that's okay.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at it from a scientific perspective, when you look at the nature of science and the nature of research, it's supposed to grow and evolve. And that's true for the humanistic science as well. So I think this is very, very important work. And also, there are times like when I don't have the lived experience, it's more important, it might be more important for someone else with the lived experience to be sharing the message.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Evelyn, I'm going to throw you a question I didn't really warn you about, but I'm wondering,
Uh-oh.
do you have do you have a favorite kind of story or anecdote that you can share with us about the power of permission or intuitive eating? Do you have something you like to share that sort of encapsulates your work and what you do?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I've got so many. My struggle right now is with stopping and figuring out which is the best one. But the power of permission is something I see over and over and over again. Probably my best favorite story, and it's a sad one, but it's a happy one, was somebody. And I'm trying to remember if I wrote this in the book or not, but it was somebody who grew up in a very weight appearance family. And by the way, I always assume that parents are well-meaning. They just sometimes are misinformed on how they go about what it is that they do. And in this family, they were weight appearance and very health focused to the point where um, this patient of mine was not allowed to have sugar anywhere, no dessert. Even on her birthday, she couldn't choose her own birthday cake. Her mom picked it out. So as a result, it's no surprise really that she grew up fixated on birthday cakes, and that's what she would end up binging on. And so she came to work with me and wanted to make a peace with birthday cakes. And I was shocked because she wanted to start then. And this story is a long ago story, but it's a favorite one, which is why I still remember it. She wanted to start by buying a sheet cake at a bakery, and a sheet cake serves a party. That's like 25 people. And back then, they didn't have cupcake shops like they do now on every corner, because I probably would have suggested she start a little smaller and build confidence. But she felt really ready, had done a lot of work in her therapy, had read. I'm trying to remember what all she had done, but she was just ready. And when someone's ready, I don't want to say you can't do this. And so we talked about what would be the conditions to have this experience on making peace with food. Well, it would be that she would pretty much be well fed. You don't want to be meal hungry and then eating a birthday cake, because you're going to eat a meal's worth, which might not feel so good, and add more fear into that process. So long story short, we set it all up. And she was so excited by what happened. She had to call me before we even had our next session. And she described to me in the voicemail that her favorite part is the birthday cake frosting. And she had her first bite of the frosting and there was no taste to it. She couldn't believe it. So she went and had a second bite. And once again, same thing. Still didn't believe it. So on the third bite, she eats it again and she noticed it tastes like wax. And basically what she was describing was like Crisco shortening. There's no flavor. So then she decided, well, maybe I should have both the frosting and the cake. And she had that together and still nothing. And she had, I think, a few more bites and that was it. And she ended up throwing out the cake, not because she was out of control, but she just really didn't want it. And she was shocked by that. And so we processed that in session. And it's, again, one of these phenomenons when you're so caught up in the excitement of eating the forbidden food that you're not even tasting it. You're in the drama of the excitement. Hurry up and get this done before I change my mind. And so she was truly, truly tasting and experiencing it for the first time. And it had no power on her. Now, this is more of an unusual story because she was extremely ready. And at the same time, it's really classic. I see this all the time. Now, some people may end up discovering they do love that particular food, but it turns out when you have permission, you're not willing to eat it in a way in which you're stressed out or while you're driving to work and on the sly. You want to do it in a way that you can truly taste. And so what happens is, as these experiences start happening over and over again, people really develop not just trust in their body, but it's like cross-training for trust in themselves, trust in the process, trust in life, trust in making decisions, trust in getting connected to their life's purpose. And I cannot tell you how beautiful that is. And I had a patient once say to me, Evelyn, I read all your books and these case studies just sound a little too good to be true, to be honest. She goes, but now I look at me 2 years later and I can't believe how my own life has changed. So it's kind of something like that. And I'm sure you've seen that on your end as well.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the closest to magic I've seen in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you're saying of how this scale of permission and trust can then translate into permission and trust in other areas that then connects you to some of the most dear and personal and important things in the entire world, like your life's purpose.
Yeah.
I see that too. And that's what I love about this work we get to do, and this work that anyone listening is probably engaging in with their own lives as well. It's just such powerful work, almost spiritual. It's
Well,
really
it
amazing.
actually, it really, really is. It's like a privilege. And I get a lot of patients that, they're tearful and they're thanking me, and it's like, thank you for the appreciation, but what's real important is to see that you did this. You had the courage. You're the ones that took the steps, and you connected to something far, far, far deeper. And it's so profound. I'm getting chills right now as I'm saying this to you, and it's so gratifying. That's why I think I'll never tire of this work. But when you start trusting your own self, because this is an empowerment model, it just crossovers to so many other areas in life. And then sometimes I've had patients become very sad at realizing how much of their life has been wasted away in
Yeah.
pursuit of a different body and in pursuit of the dieting. And the truth is, as you know, we can't go back and change the past. We can certainly grieve for what was lost and move forward in a way that's differently and more connected. But it's actually really profound.
Absolutely. Oh, it so is. And I know we're running out of time. let's just quickly, do you want to share with people how they can find you and how they can keep in touch and follow along with your work?
Sure. Probably the easiest now that I'm on Instagram, you can follow me on there, Evelyn Tribbley. For dietitians and other health professionals listening to this, I'm constantly doing trainings on this because we certify and train people in our method for the sake of integrity. And I post those on Facebook and Instagram as well. And I'd say, yeah, next year around this time, probably in the spring, our newest edition of Intuitive Eating should be out. So, yeah.
That's so great. You heard it here first, guys.
I think you did. I think it's the first time mentioning it. Yeah.
It's awesome. Well, Evelyn, thank you so much. This was so much fun to talk with you. I want to keep going. I want to, anyway, we could keep going forever, but
yeah, it's so easy. But I've got a patient. But otherwise, I could talk forever ad infinitum on this because it's such a passion. It truly is. Yeah.
Well, thank you from the bottom of my heart and all of the people that I serve's heart. We owe you so much, and we're so grateful for your incredible work. Thank you for being brave enough to put that out there and for continuing to be amazing. We just love you.
Wow, geez. And thanks for spreading the word. I so appreciate it.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.